Long ago, before kings raised golden palaces or empires laid roads across continents, there were only the winds and the wandering people who followed them. Across the open grasslands of Central Asia, beneath endless skies, tribes on horseback moved slowly southward, drawn by the promise of new lands. It was around the year 1000 before our era, a time when the age of bronze was fading and the first iron tools whispered of change. These were no armies, but families, herders and riders who lived with their animals, who read the earth and the stars, and who shared a language carried on soft winds, the tongue of the Aryans, which meant simply, the noble ones. Their journey was not swift. It flowed like a river over generations, a quiet tide of movement that would one day shape the destiny of a land we now call Iran. As they settled the vast and varied plateau, they found a land of extremes, snow-capped mountains, salt-stained deserts, and green valleys hidden like jewels in stone. To the north rose the Alborz Mountains, guarding the Caspian Sea like ancient sentinels. To the west stood the rugged Zagros Range, forming a stone wall between this new land and the mighty powers of Mesopotamia. Between them stretched a great plateau, dry, often harsh, yet hiding fertile pockets where seeds could take root and families could grow. Here, these early settlers learned to tame the land, not by force, but by understanding. Water was scarce, so they listened to the mountains and coaxed it from deep beneath the earth. They carved underground channels, gentle veins of life called qanats, that carried sweet water from mountain springs to thirsty soil. Even now, thousands of years later, some still flow. Time moved forward. By the 8th century before the Common Era, two peoples had come to shape the highlands, the Medes in the northwest, and in the south, the Pasargadae, the tribe from which the name Persia would one day grow. The Medes made their home in the lush pastures near the Caspian Sea, their lives steeped in horses and highland warfare. They built fortified towns with thick walls and sturdy gates. One city, Ecbatana, stood like a jewel in the mountains, a place of 7 concentric walls, each a different color, silver and gold shining at its heart. To the south, among the arid hills and sunlit plains of modern-day Fars, the Pasargadae built quieter lives. Their land was tougher, drier, and their genius lay in turning desert into farmland. Scattered villages clung to water sources, and their communities thrived on kinship, memory, and trust, weaving a strong fabric of local bonds that would one day become the backbone of an empire. These were not yet nations, not yet empires, but families of tribes, each led by chieftains who guided with wisdom and strength. Their flocks moved with the seasons, their hands worked the soil, and their hearts beat with the rhythms of the land. But on the far horizon, a shadow stirred. To the west lay Assyria, a fierce and fearsome kingdom. Its armies marched with iron in hand, its kings carved their triumphs in stone. The Assyrians were masters of war, and their gaze turned eastward. In their records, the names of the Medes and the Persua, early echoes of Persia, appear as lands to be conquered or taxed. The threat was real, and it drew the tribes together. The Medes, closest to danger, were the first to gather in unity. Stories tell of a man named Deiosis, a wise leader who brought order to the scattered clans and built a city from which he could rule. Whether legend or truth, his tale speaks of a time when loose alliances began to knit into something greater. As the 7th century unfolded, the winds shifted. Assyria weakened, its empire strained, and into that crack stepped a man named Cyaxares, a Median king with vision and fire in his heart. He reformed his armies, shaped them into disciplined forces of archers, spearmen and cavalry, and waited for the right moment. When Babylon rose in rebellion, the Medes joined them. Together, they marched on Nineveh, the proud Assyrian capital. And in the year 612 BCE, the unthinkable happened. The city fell, the age of Assyria ended in fire and ruin. And from its ashes, new powers rose. The Medes now no longer survivors, but contenders. And just beyond their growing shadow in the dry hills of the south, a young Persian lineage waited its turn. As the shadow of Assyria faded into memory, the Medes emerged to claim what had once belonged to empires now crumbled. They stretched their rule across the northern lands, from the fading cities of Mesopotamia to the rugged hills of eastern Anatolia. Their banners fluttered where once Assyrian kings had marched. In these lands, new order took root. The Persians, those southern kin of the Medes, remained allies, loyal though independent. They lived still among their sun-drenched hills and scattered valleys, bound by ties of kinship, but watching with growing ambition. Their leaders paid respect to the Median kings, yet their eyes remained on their own horizons. Though brief in years, the Median Empire left deep footprints. It showed the peoples of the plateau that they were not merely subjects of older powers, but creators of empire themselves. From the ashes of conquest, a new idea began to stir, that the lands of the East could stand equal to Babylon and Nineveh, not in ruins but in rule. The Medes adopted the tools of empire: scribes, roads, taxation, governors, all drawn from the well of Mesopotamian statecraft. Yet they kept their own colors, blending the old with the new. Cities blossomed, artists painted, carved and shaped stories in clay and stone. Their works carried the soul of their land, a harmony of mountain, steppe, and fire. And in the heart of this cultural flowering, in the quiet corners of faith, something extraordinary was unfolding. Somewhere, perhaps in the eastern hills, perhaps along a river bank at dawn, a man named Zarathustra began to speak. He was not a king, nor a warrior, but a seeker. The world he lived in was filled with many gods and endless rituals. Yet in visions, he saw something clearer, a light that burned beyond the veil of things. He spoke of one wise lord, Ahura Mazda, the source of all that is good, radiant, and true. Opposing him was a shadow, the spirit of destruction and lies, Angra Mainyu. Zarathustra taught that life was not a game of fate, but a path of choice. Each person held a spark of power, the ability to choose truth over falsehood, light over darkness. Through good thoughts, good words, and good deeds, one could shape the world, and their soul's place within it. These teachings, preserved in hymns called the Gathas, would echo across the centuries. They offered not just comfort, but clarity, that humans mattered in the great dance of the cosmos, that they were not puppets of unseen gods, but partners in the story of creation. Though not all embraced his message, and old beliefs endured, Zarathustra's flame caught hold, slow at first, then steady. His faith would spread, mingling with culture, politics, and kingship itself. Rulers began to see themselves not only as men of power, but as guardians of truth, defenders of order against the chaos beyond the walls. By the middle of the 7th century before our era, the land was ready. The Medes stood tall, their warriors hardened, their halls filled with song and law. The Persians had carved out their strength in the southern hills, quietly building cities, temples, and tradition. And beyond them, the old giants of Egypt, Babylon, and Lydia played their games of alliance and suspicion. No one could yet see it, but something ancient was stirring in the south, a fire that would change the world. Among the Pasargadae tribe, in a place of dust and olive trees, a child was born. His name was Cyrus, as the Greeks would one day call him. He would grow into something more than prince or warrior. He would become the architect of an idea, that many lands could be one, and many peoples could walk under one law, yet keep their own gods and tongues. But in 650 BCE, this dream was not yet dreamed. The Medes ruled from their fortresses. The Persians grew in silence. Across the known world, kings ruled as they always had, by fear, by tribute, by war. And yet, something was changing. Before we follow Cyrus and the birth of empire, we must turn briefly to another world, not of battle or decree, but of myth. For long before history wrote with stylus and parchment, memory sang through verse and tale. Around fires, in royal courts, and under starlit skies, stories passed from father to son, from mother to daughter. Tales of heroes and monsters, of noble kings and treacherous foes. These stories shaped the soul of a people. Centuries later, in a time of poets and scribes, these legends were gathered into a great tapestry known as the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings. Composed by the poet Ferdowsi, it wove together Iran's mythic past, preserving the echo of voices long silenced. Though written in the 10th century of our era, the Shahnameh reaches deep into the mists of time, to an age when man still walked among giants. It is more than story, it is a mirror of the Iranian spirit, resilient, noble, tragic, and radiant. Before empire, there was legend. And from legend, the seeds of destiny. Now, dear listener, rest easy. Let the names drift gently in your mind: Zarathustra, Kurash, Ahura Mazda. Like soft stars above a desert plain, the path ahead winds toward golden cities and wide roads, toward one of the greatest empires the world has ever known. But for now, breathe deep. The night is long, and history waits patiently. Before kings wore golden crowns or armies marched beneath banners of empire, the land remembered in a different way, through story. These were the days before time had names, before dates marked the passing of years. In the hush of twilight, around flickering fires, elders whispered the first tales of how the world was made, how the first humans learned to till the soil, to make fire, and to rule not by force, but by wisdom. The earliest of these ancient kings, it is said, was a man named Achaemenid, the first to don a crown, the first to teach his people the ways of civilization. His descendants brought great gifts to humanity. One discovered fire, another taught the art of forging iron. Step by step, the world was shaped not by divine thunder, but by gentle instruction, the gift of order, passed hand to hand. Then came the warriors of the Pishtadian and Chionian dynasties, whose kings did not only rule, they battled demons, guarded their lands from chaos, and kept the delicate flame of truth alive. Their enemies were both monstrous and familiar, not just beasts and sorcerers, but the ever-present shadow of disorder. Raiders from the wild, storms from the unknown. Through every tale, a single thread is woven: the struggle to hold light against the encroaching dark, to keep the house in order when the winds of ruin blow. But of all these tales, one name shines brightest. One figure stands above them all: Rostam the lion-hearted, the son of Zel and the noble Rutabak. Born into a world where strength and virtue were prized above all, Rostam grew quickly, towering in stature and courage. With his mighty steed Raksh, a horse as proud and fierce as its rider, he fought for kings, for justice, and for the soul of the realm. He was a guardian of the throne, a slayer of monsters, a judge of right and wrong. Yet even the greatest hero is not beyond the reach of sorrow. There is a story, a quiet wound in the middle of the Shahnameh, that speaks not of triumph, but of tragic misunderstanding. It is the story of Rostam and Sword. As a young man, Rostam traveled to a distant land. There he met a princess, Tamina, and in their brief time together, a child was conceived. Rostam left, unaware, leaving behind a bracelet for the unborn child, a small token of love and fate. Sohaba was raised in secret, growing into a warrior as bold and brilliant as his father. Yet he knew his father only through stories. When war broke out between their kingdoms, fate, that quiet hand that moves all things, brought them to the same battlefield, on opposite sides. Unknowing, they fought. For 3 days they battled, strength meeting strength, neither yielding. On the final day Rostam, seasoned by age and experience, struck the final blow. Sohaba fell. And then, too late, the truth was revealed. A bracelet, a name, a dawning horror. Rostam had slain his own son. Sohaba, wise even in death, spoke softly: "It is not your fault. This was written in the stars." Rostam wept. The ground itself seemed to mourn. Sohaba was buried with honor, and even the armies bowed their heads. This tale, passed down through generations, is no simple tragedy. It is a mirror, showing us how pride clouds judgment, how silence can destroy, and how even love, when unspoken, can become a wound. Yet the stories do not end there. Within the pages of the Shahnameh, kings rise and fall. Some rule with wisdom, just, generous, and humble, before the heavens. Others fall to arrogance, cruelty, and the poisoned whispers of evil. One king, Zahak, listened to the voice of darkness. From his shoulders sprouted serpents, cursed creatures who fed on the brains of the innocent. His reign of terror lasted 800 years, until a humble blacksmith Kaveh raised the banner of rebellion, and a prince named Faradin restored the light. These stories taught not just children, but kings. They were not just fables, they were blueprints. A true king, the legends say, must listen to counsel, protect the weak, seek justice, and honor the divine order. Power without virtue leads only to ruin. From these ancient tales came symbols that would endure through centuries. The crown, the ring, the royal mace, even the grand palaces of real emperors, carved into the cliffs at Persepolis, echo the architecture once described only in legend. The kings of the Shonama did not just fight, they feasted, they composed music, they recited poetry, and above all, they celebrated the turning of the year with Nowruz, the festival of spring, still cherished today. A moment of renewal, balance, and light. The Shahnameh painted the world in two realms: Iran, the land of truth and civilization, and Turan, the shadowed domain of chaos and barbarism. Though symbolic, these names would shape real maps and real wars. The myth became memory. The memory became identity. And so, from these whispered tales and starlit legends, a people drew strength. They remembered what it meant to stand with honor, to lead with wisdom, to rise, even after sorrow. As we return now to the waking world, let the names of these heroes drift through your dreams. Ross, Tom, Sohrab, Kaveh, Feridun, rest gently beneath their watchful gaze. The story will continue, and with it, the rise of Cyrus, and the dawn of the Achaemenid Empire. But for now, close your eyes. History will wait. As we return now from the high peaks of legend to the long roads of history, we must not forget the myths we leave behind. They never truly fade. Even as stone cities rose and kings marched beneath carved banners, the stories of heroes and demons still lived, told in golden halls and whispered in shepherds' fields. The Achaemenid kings, masters of vast dominions and cunning administration, saw themselves not just as rulers, but as inheritors of that ancient flame, protectors of truth. Of Asha, the sacred order first laid down by mythical kings, long before maps were drawn. And so, as messengers raced along imperial highways, as governors counted grain and soldiers guarded mountain passes, the tales of Rostam and Sohrab still echoed. They offered meaning to the scribe and soldier alike, binding a vast and diverse people with a shared vision of destiny. Into this world, as the 6th century before our era unfolded, a child was born, a boy whose name would one day be spoken across the known world in awe and reverence. He was called Kuresh, though the world would come to know him as Cyrus. He was born among the sunlit hills of Pars, in a region called Anshan, where the Persians had long kept to their traditions, proud, patient, and quietly ambitious. His lineage, like the best of tales, is wrapped in both record and rumor. The Greek storyteller Herodotus wove a tale of omens and royal dreams, that Cyrus was the grandson of a Median king, Astyages born to his daughter Mandane, and a Persian noble Cambyses. Fearing a prophecy that the child would one day topple him, the old king ordered the infant killed. But fate, as ever, had its own designs. A loyal servant spared the boy, placing him in the care of a humble shepherd. Whether myth or memory, the boy survived, and grew. Persian records, however, offer a quieter version. In them, Cyrus is no orphan prince, but the rightful heir of a noble line, a member of the Achaemenid house, whose roots ran deep into the soil of southern Iran. These sources speak of a young leader who inherited the rule of Anshan around 559 BCE, still subordinate to the Median overlords, but ruling his own people with wisdom and strength. Whichever story you choose to believe, one truth remains: from humble beginnings, a world-changing path began. At this time, the world was held in the grip of 4 great powers. To the north stood Media, ruled by King Astyages from his stronghold at Ecbatana, old, proud, and vigilant. To the west lay Lydia, a kingdom of shining wealth and stone temples, ruled by King Croesus, whose riches would echo through proverb and legend. Further still, beyond the rivers of Babylon, the great cities of Mesopotamia lay under the rule of King Nabonidus, heir to an ancient legacy stretching back to Sumer. And to the south, along the winding Nile, Egypt endured, old as the sun, ruled by pharaohs who claimed descent from gods. These kingdoms traded, schemed, and watched one another warily, balanced on a delicate web of power. None could have imagined that a 5th force, hidden among the hills of Persia, would soon eclipse them all. And yet, that quiet revolution began, not with conquest, but with rebellion. Cyrus, once a loyal vassal of the Median king, turned his gaze northward. Some say Astyages had grown cruel, Others claim his soldiers turned against him. Whatever the cause, the Persians rose. Around 550 BCE, two armies met, the Medes, experienced and confident, and the Persians, bold and determined. Against all odds, the younger Cyrus triumphed. The Median forces broke, and Ecbatana, the mountain capital, fell. And yet, in a moment that marked him as different from conquerors past, Cyrus did not burn the city. He did not punish its people or tear down its temples. Instead, he honored the Medes. He welcomed them not as enemies, but as brothers. He claimed not the spoils of war, but the legacy of rule. He called himself heir to their throne, and invited them into his growing realm. It was a gentle conquest, yet one that reshaped the map. The old Median Empire did not vanish. It transformed, becoming the roots from which the Persian tree would rise. And so the first threads of empire were spun, not through slaughter, but through wisdom. Not by erasing what came before, but by weaving it into something greater. Cyrus had stepped into history. The world would never be the same. Cyrus the Great, the name alone conjures images of gold and granite, of distant lands bound together by shared law and a quiet, unshakable order. But what made his empire endure was not just the reach of his armies, it was the grace with which he ruled. From the beginning, Cyrus understood something most conquerors never do, that true power does not lie in domination, but in harmony, in weaving many peoples into one fabric, not by force, but through respect. This principle became the soul of Achaemenid rule, a new vision of empire, where unity did not require uniformity. Yet even this wise vision could not shield the young realm from danger. The first to challenge it was King Croesus of Lydia, a man famed not only for his fabulous wealth, but also for his confidence in fate. Troubled by the rise of Persian strength, he turned to the Oracle of Delphi. The message was cryptic: if you go to war, a great empire shall fall. Convinced it referred to his enemies, Croesus gathered his forces. But it was his empire that would fall. As winter settled over the land, a time when most armies rested, Cyrus moved swiftly. He struck during the cold season, catching Croesus off guard. The Lydians retreated to Sardis, their glittering capital, believing they had until spring. But Cyrus followed without pause. On the plains outside the city, the Persians met the famed Lydian cavalry, unmatched in open battle. But Cyrus, ever the tactician, placed camels at the front of his army. The Lydian horses, startled by the strange scent, broke formation. The battle was lost before it truly began. Sardis fell, the kingdom was taken. And once again, Cyrus chose restraint over ruin. Some say Croesus was burned alive. Others tell that he was spared, becoming a trusted advisor at the Persian court. Whichever tale is true, the Lydian people were treated not as vanquished foes, but as new citizens of a greater whole. Their temples were spared, their nobles retained place and voice. This new province being formed, with Lydia and Media now part of his growing realm, Cyrus turned his gaze eastward. For years, he campaigned through the rugged lands we now know as Afghanistan, Central Asia, and parts of Pakistan. The records are sparse, but their echoes speak of conquests in Bactria and Parthia. Even to the edge of the Indus, the eastern gates of the empire were secured. But one jewel remained, the most ancient, the most glorious. Babylon, a city of towering ziggurats, and whispered prayers, of law, trade, and memory. But within its mighty walls, unrest simmered. Its king Nabonidus had turned from Marduk, the city's patron god, favoring the moon god Sin. Priests grumbled. The people whispered. The capital lay vulnerable. Cyrus advanced. He defeated Nabonidus's forces at Opis along the Tigris. And then, with remarkable cunning, he diverted the waters of the Euphrates, lowering the river enough for his troops to enter the city beneath its walls. But there was no battle, no blood. Cyrus had already won the hearts of the people. On the 29th of October, 539 BCE, Babylon fell, not with fire, but with welcome. In the years that followed, Cyrus would issue a proclamation on a clay cylinder, now famous across the world. In it, he described not conquest, but restoration. He returned sacred statues to their temples. He allowed exiled peoples to go home, among them the Jews who had long wept by the rivers of Babylon. To them, Cyrus was no foreign king, he was anointed a deliverer. This was not favoritism, it was policy. Cyrus understood that ruling an empire of many faiths and peoples meant allowing them to remain who they were. So long as provinces paid their tribute and kept peace, they were free to worship as they pleased, speak their own languages, and follow local laws. The Achaemenid Empire was divided into satrapies, each governed by a satrap or protector of the kingdom. These governors managed order, collected taxes, and upheld the king's authority. Yet beneath that royal umbrella, the everyday life of each region continued with astonishing freedom. Such was the genius of Cyrus's system, a strong center, surrounded by many local hearts. In his homeland, amid the hills of Pars, he built his capital at Pasargadae, not a fortress of fear, but a garden of harmony. The palaces there drew from many traditions: Mesopotamian strength, Median elegance, Elamite symmetry. Stone met flower, empire met earth. From this quiet place, the empire pulsed, from the Aegean Sea to the mountains of Hindu Kush, from the valleys of Anatolia to the deserts of Arabia. And then, just as suddenly as he had risen, Cyrus left the stage of history. Some say he died in battle, far to the north, facing the fierce Sassanid. Their queen, Tamiris, is said to have slain him, and dipped his head into a skin of blood. Others believe he passed peacefully in his palace, the crown resting gently beside him. His tomb still stands in Pasargadae, a simple stone chamber atop a stepped platform, weathered by time, but untouched by pride. Even Alexander the Great, centuries later, would stand before it in silence. Cyrus left more than a kingdom, he left a vision, an empire not of forced sameness, but of shared dignity, a rule not of fear, but of trust. His successors would build upon this foundation, but none would match the quiet brilliance of the one who began it all. And so the great road stretched on, carved by dreamers, guarded by soldiers, and watched over by poets who remembered that once, long ago, a shepherd's son rose, not only to rule the world, but to change how it was ruled. Despite later clashes with his heirs, the Greeks regarded Cyrus as the ideal monarch. Xenophon's Cyropaedia paints him as a model ruler, wise, just, and virtuous. The Roman Empire borrowed many Achaemenid innovations in governance, and even today, modern Iran celebrates Cyrus as the father of the nation. Perhaps the most unexpected tribute comes from the United Nations, where a replica of Cyrus's famous clay cylinder rests in New York, often hailed as the world's first charter of human rights. The cylinder's modern significance may be debated, but it rightly honors Cyrus's groundbreaking vision, a ruler who championed governance based on respect for diverse peoples and religions, limited state power, and rule by consent rather than fear. These ideals still inspire. As Cyrus's son Cambyses prepared to ascend the throne, he inherited not only vast lands, but a revolutionary concept of empire, one destined to evolve under his reign and those of his successors. The Achaemenid Empire was born, and the ancient world would never be the same. When Cyrus passed around 530 BCE, Cambyses, already regent of Babylon during his father's eastern campaigns, assumed power over a domain stretching from the Mediterranean to the Hindu Kush. His challenge: prove himself worthy of his father's legacy. The transfer of power was smooth, testament to the solid system Cyrus had built. Cambyses's first challenge was internal, from his brother Berdia, called Smerdis by the Greeks, who governed the eastern provinces. Though details remain unclear, Cambyses swiftly neutralized this threat. With his rule secure, Cambyses set his sights on the last great independent kingdom in the Near East, in Egypt. For nearly 3,000 years, Egypt, land of pharaohs, had dominated the Nile Valley and extended its influence into Asia. It was now the final prize to complete Achaemenid control of the eastern Mediterranean. Cambyses began preparations for the defining campaign of his reign. Pharaoh Amasis, who ruled for over 4 decades, sensed the growing threat. He fortified Egypt's defenses and sought alliances with Greek states, especially Cyprus and Samos, aiming to counter the Achaemenid naval strength. But fate intervened. Amasis died in 526 BCE, leaving the throne to his son, Psamtik III, a young, untested ruler facing the greatest military threat of his time. In 525 BCE, Cambyses launched his invasion. His army marched along the Mediterranean coast, supported by a fleet of Phoenician, Ionian, Greek, and Cypriot ships. One critical ally was Vanes of Halicarnassus, a former mercenary commander in Egypt, who defected to the Persians, bringing vital intelligence on Egyptian defenses and terrain. A major obstacle stood between the invaders and Egypt proper, the Sinai Desert. Here, Cambyses demonstrated the same logistical brilliance that had marked his father's campaigns. According to Herodotus, Arab allies helped the army navigate the harsh desert by supplying water carried in animal skin containers on camels. Upon reaching the eastern branch of the Nile Delta, the invading forces met the Egyptian army near Pelusium. Despite fierce determination and home advantage, the Egyptians could not withstand the assault. After a brutal battle, their lines broke, and the survivors retreated toward Memphis, Egypt's ancient capital. Following this victory, the Achaemenid army pressed deeper into the delta, eventually reaching Memphis itself. After a brief siege, the city fell. Psamtik III was captured. Initially, custom dictated respectful treatment of defeated monarchs, and he was honored. But when evidence surfaced of his involvement in rebellion, Cambyses ordered his execution. With the fall of Memphis in 525 BCE, Egypt became a satrapy, a province of the Achaemenid Empire. This victory was more than military conquest. It was the absorption of the world's oldest continuing civilization into the newest and largest empire. The land of the pharaohs, with its 3,000 years of recorded history, now answered to a distant throne. Yet Cambyses was not content with mere conquest. He adopted the full titles and regalia of an Egyptian pharaoh, presenting himself to his new subjects as the legitimate successor to their ancient line of kings. In Egyptian records, he appears as Mesotire, offspring of Ra, with a proper pharaonic titular temple. Inscriptions show him kneeling in the traditional Egyptian pose, offering prayers to the gods of the Nile. This cultural flexibility, the willingness to adapt to local traditions, rather than impose foreign customs, reflected the imperial philosophy his father had established. While maintaining absolute authority, Cambyses recognized the importance of respecting Egypt's ancient religious and cultural institutions. Not all his policies were so enlightened. Herodotus recounts stories of sacrilege and cruelty, killing the sacred Apis bull, desecrating royal tombs, mocking Egyptian customs. These accounts may be exaggerated or fabricated, reflecting later Egyptian resentment of Persian rule. But they shaped a negative image of Cambyses in classical sources. Modern historians take a more nuanced view. Archaeological evidence suggests Cambyses continued the tradition of reverence for the Apis bull, with records of a bull's burial during his reign. He also appears to have supported powerful temple establishments, understanding their central role in Egyptian society and governance. With Egypt secured, Cambyses' ambitions stretched further. He planned expeditions westward to Carthage and southward to Ethiopia. The campaign against Carthage was abandoned when the Phoenician fleet, the backbone of Achaemenid naval power, refused to attack their own colony. The sailors were loyal to the empire, but not against their kin. The southern expedition into Nubia, modern Sudan, achieved some success, extending Persian influence beyond the first cataract of the Nile. However, an attempted march across the desert to attack the oasis of Siwa ended in disaster. A massive sandstorm allegedly buried thousands of soldiers. While the historical accuracy of this event is debated, it marked a limit to imperial expansion in Africa. After nearly 3 years in Egypt, Cambyses was called back east to attend matters at the empire's core. It was during this journey that the most dramatic episode of his reign unfolded. News arrived that a man claiming to be Berdia, the king's brother, had seized the throne in his absence. Whether this claimant was the true Berdia, supposedly eliminated earlier by Cambyses, or an impostor named Gomata, as later official accounts assert, remains one of history's enduring mysteries. Whatever his true identity, this figure had one substantial support, promising a 3-year tax holiday across the empire. The sudden news of rebellion struck Cambyses deeply as he raced back toward the imperial heartland to reclaim his throne. But fate was cruel. The monarch died under mysterious circumstances. Herodotus says Cambyses accidentally stabbed himself with his own dagger while mounting his horse, the wound becoming fatal through infection. Native traditions place his death in Damascus. The timing could hardly have been worse, with no heir ready to succeed and questions surrounding Berdia's identity. The empire faced its first major succession crisis. Less than a decade after its founding, contemporary Greek writers painted Cambyses as a madman prone to cruel outbursts. Herodotus tells grim tales, the king shooting the son of a close advisor to prove his sobriety, burying 12 nobles alive, and executing subjects for minor offenses. These stories have cast a long shadow, marking Cambyses among history's infamous mad rulers. Yet these harsh portrayals must be weighed alongside his real achievements. Under Cambyses, the empire reached its greatest territorial extent before Darius the Great's reign. The conquest of Egypt, a civilization far older than Persia itself, stood as a monumental feat. His administrative policies in Egypt, continuing his father's respect for local culture, helped integrate this ancient land into the imperial system. Cambyses's death in 522 BCE brought a chaotic end to the first phase of Achaemenid expansion. The young dynasty, still untested in succession, now faced a crisis that threatened to unravel all it had built. The empire, forged so rapidly by father and son, stood at a fragile crossroads. Into this turmoil stepped a new figure, not a direct descendant of Cyrus, but destined to become the greatest of Achaemenid rulers. Darius, son of Astaspas, a noble of the royal clan, would soon seize the throne, eliminate the usurper, and cement his legitimacy through military skill and elaborate ideological claims. The institutions and policies he established would shape the empire for 2 centuries. As the summer of 522 BCE drew to a close, none could foresee the remarkable stability and prosperity that would emerge from this crisis. The succession turmoil following Cambyses's death is shrouded in conflicting reports. But one fact stands clear: a man claiming to be Berdia, Cambyses's brother, had seized power. Whether genuine or an impostor named Gomata remains debated among scholars. Amid this chaos, Darius emerged, a remarkable noble from a collateral branch of the royal family. As a young aristocrat, he served as a spearman in the royal guard, gaining first-hand experience with court politics and military affairs. According to his famous Behistun inscription, a massive multilingual relief carved into a cliff in western Iran, Darius led a conspiracy of 7 noble families against the usurper. In a daring palace raid at Susa, the conspirators surprised and killed the man claiming to be Berdia. With this immediate threat removed, Darius faced a delicate political situation. Though related to the royal line, he was not Cyrus's direct descendant. To strengthen his claim, Darius married Atossa, daughter of Cyrus, blending pragmatic politics with personal alliance. Despite these moves, rebellions erupted across the empire. From Babylon to Bactria, Armenia to Elam, as provincial leaders rejected the new king's authority. His own inscriptions boast 19 battles in a single year against 9 rival kings. Through military skill, strategic brilliance, and sometimes brutal repression, Darius suppressed these revolts. The scale of this feat cannot be overstated. The empire Cyrus had founded teetered on the edge of collapse. By sheer force of will and prowess, Darius preserved its unity, a realm spanning 3 continents and dozens of cultures. Once firmly seated on his throne, Darius revealed himself not only as a warrior but as an administrative genius. He transformed the loosely governed territories into a coherent state with standardized systems for governance, taxation, and communication. The empire was divided into roughly 20 provinces, or satrapies, each overseen by a satrap appointed directly by the crown. These provincial governors, typically drawn from aristocratic families, collected taxes, administered justice, maintained order, and raised troops when required. To prevent these powerful officials from developing independent power bases, the king appointed separate military commanders and imperial secretaries within each province, creating a system of checks and balances. Royal inspectors, known as the eyes and ears of the king, traveled throughout the empire, monitoring officials' conduct and reporting directly to the throne. These agents could arrive unannounced in any province with full authority to investigate complaints and correct abuses of power. Thanks to this oversight, even the most distant regions remained firmly under central control. A standardized tax system replaced the earlier, more ad hoc tribute arrangements. Each satrapy was assigned a fixed annual tribute based on its resources and productivity. Babylon, the wealthiest province, paid the equivalent of 25 tons of silver yearly, while less affluent regions like Bactria contributed smaller amounts. These substantial revenues funded the royal court, standing army, grand building projects, and the vast administrative apparatus. The great administrator introduced the first standardized imperial coinage. The gold daric and silver siglos offered reliable currency for both state transactions and private trade, minted with consistent weight and purity. These coins circulated widely, promoting economic integration across regions that had once relied on barter or local exchange systems. The famous Royal Road exemplified this ruler's administrative vision. Stretching over 1,500 miles from Sardis in western Anatolia to Susa in southwestern Iran. This highway featured regularly spaced rest stations, bridges spanning major rivers, and mounted couriers who could relay messages across the entire empire in less than 2 weeks. Herodotus admired these couriers, writing that neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor darkness of night prevents them from completing their appointed course with utmost speed. This emphasis on communication reflected a sophisticated grasp of imperial governance. Military might could conquer lands, but effective administration demanded rapid transmission of information and royal commands. The road and courier network allowed the central government to swiftly respond to rebellions, natural disasters, or bureaucratic issues in far-flung provinces. Legal reforms complemented these administrative advances. While provinces were encouraged to codify their local laws, certain universal principles applied empire-wide. Royal judges appointed by the crown supplemented local legal systems, especially for cases involving imperial interests or disputes between ethnic groups. Together, these reforms reveal a grand vision of imperial unity that transcended mere conquest, where Cyrus had laid the foundations through cultural respect and inclusion. His successor created the administrative framework necessary to turn that vision into practical governance. Together, they set a template for multinational empire that would influence all Eurasian imperial projects to follow. In 518 BCE, the master administrator commissioned a new ceremonial capital to reflect the empire's power and sophistication. At Persepolis, Parsa, an ancient Iranian construction began on a magnificent complex of palaces, reception halls, and administrative buildings atop a grand terrace overlooking the surrounding plain. Persepolis was not primarily an administrative center. Susa, Babylon, and Ecbatana continued to function as imperial capitals at different seasons, but a ritual space where the empire's power and ideology could be displayed through architecture and ceremony. Each spring, delegates from every province gathered for the New Year festival, bringing tribute that symbolized their submission to imperial authority. The most striking feature of Persepolis was the Apadana, a vast audience hall supported by 72 columns, each rising 70 feet high. Along the grand staircases leading to this hall, sculptors carved detailed reliefs depicting representatives of 23 nations bearing gifts to the king. These carvings, still visible today, provide a remarkable visual census of the empire's diversity. Bactrians with camels, Libyans carrying ostrich eggs, Ethiopians bringing ivory, Indians with gold vessels. These reliefs embody the imperial ideology at the heart of the builders' vision, an ordered world where diverse peoples willingly brought their finest goods to the great king, acknowledging his benevolent authority. Unlike Assyrian palace reliefs that glorified military conquest and the suffering of enemies, the Persepolis sculptures emphasize peaceful submission and harmonious incorporation of different nations into a single imperial system. The construction of Persepolis employed craftsmen from across the realm: Egyptian stonemasons, Lydian woodworkers, Babylonian brickmakers, Greek sculptors, making the palace itself a physical symbol of imperial integration. The architectural style blended elements from many traditions, creating something distinctively imperial rather than narrowly ethnic. This cosmopolitan approach extended beyond architecture to the daily functioning of the court and administration. Officials of diverse ethnic backgrounds held high positions. The imperial chancellery operated in Aramaic, a Semitic language serving as the administrative lingua franca, while provinces maintained records in their own languages. This pragmatic multilingualism balanced imperial control with local autonomy, supporting both governance reforms and monumental construction. The son of Darius did not neglect military affairs after securing internal stability. He turned his attention to the frontiers. Campaigns in the east extended imperial control into northwestern India, incorporating the fertile Indus Valley into the satrapy of Hindu Kush. Scythian tribes were subdued or pushed back, securing vulnerable frontiers in Bactria and Sogdiana. Most famously, the ambitious conqueror led an expedition into Europe, crossing the Bosphorus on a bridge of boats constructed by Ionian Greek engineers. After subduing Thrace, modern Bulgaria, imperial forces pushed north across the Danube, pursuing Scythian raiders who had long troubled the western borders. While this European campaign did not achieve all its aims, it established an imperial presence across the Aegean Sea, bringing the empire into direct contact and conflict with the Greek world. The encounter between these two civilizations, one a vast multinational empire, the other a collection of fiercely independent city-states, would have profound consequences for Mediterranean history. Conflict with the Greek city-states began during the later years of this expansionist reign, when Ionian Greek cities along the western coast of Anatolia rebelled against imperial rule. In 499 BCE, Athens and Eretria sent ships to support the uprising, though eventually suppressed. This revolt provoked the empire's first serious military intervention on mainland Greece in 490 BCE. An imperial expedition landed near Athens. To the surprise of both sides, the numerically superior imperial forces suffered a decisive defeat at the Battle of Marathon. This unexpected setback, while not immediately threatening the vast realm, marked the beginning of a confrontation between East and West that would continue under subsequent rulers. The defeated monarch had planned a new campaign to avenge Marathon, but domestic concerns, and then death, intervened. After 36 years of remarkable achievements in administration, construction, and military affairs, the son of his star spouse died in 486 BCE, leaving the throne to his son, Xerxes. The legacy of this transformative ruler extends far beyond his military campaigns or administrative innovations. He created a model of imperial governance sophisticated enough to manage the largest and most diverse political entity the world had yet seen. The systems he established proved so effective that they continued, with only minor modifications, for 2 centuries, surviving multiple successions, external challenges, and internal rebellions. When later Greek writers sought to understand the nature of imperial rule, they looked to his reign as the definitive example. When Alexander the Great conquered the empire 2 centuries later, he adopted many administrative practices established during this period. The Romans, in turn, borrowed from both the Alexandrian and original imperial models in constructing their own systems of provincial governance. More subtly, this monarch's reign represented the culmination of a revolutionary concept of universal empire, first envisioned by Cyrus the Great. Under his administration, the realm became not merely a collection of conquered territories, but an integrated system where diverse peoples could maintain their cultural and religious identities while participating in a common imperial project. This achievement becomes all the more remarkable when compared to the empires that preceded it. The Assyrians and Babylonians ruled through terror and forced population transfers. The son of his star spouse, like Cyrus before him, recognized that accommodation of diversity provided a more stable foundation for imperial rule than attempts at cultural homogenization. In the Behistun inscription, the ruler presents himself as the enemy of lies and the champion of truth. Beyond its immediate political context, this ideological framework reflects a sophisticated understanding that legitimate authority rests on a moral foundation. Physical power might conquer, but only just governance could create a stable realm. As his son Xerxes prepared to take the throne, the empire stood at its zenith, administratively coherent, economically prosperous, militarily powerful. The institutions established during this remarkable 36-year reign would provide the framework for imperial governance long after the memory of individual kings had faded, creating not just conquests, but systems. The third great Achaemenid monarch had ensured the durability of the imperial achievement. When the son of his spouse breathed his last in 486 BCE, his son Xerxes inherited an empire at the height of its power and organization. The new sovereign, whose name meant ruling over heroes, had been groomed for leadership from youth. As the eldest son born after his father became king, Xerxes had a stronger claim to legitimacy than his father had possessed through his mother, a Sassanid daughter of Cyrus the Great. He united the two branches of the Achaemenid dynasty. The early years of his reign focused on consolidating authority and addressing internal challenges. Egypt had rebelled late in his father's rule, and the young monarch's first major campaign reconquered the land of the Nile, imposing harsher rule than before. Babylon attempted revolt twice during this period, resulting in the destruction of some temples and the removal of the golden statue of Marduk, the chief deity, a significant departure from the more accommodating policies of previous rulers. With these internal matters settled, the royal gaze turned westward toward unfinished business with the Greeks. The unexpected defeat at Marathon during his father's reign remained a stain on imperial prestige. More practically, the fiercely independent Greek city-states posed a potential threat to imperial holdings in western Anatolia. A decisive demonstration of overwhelming power might finally incorporate these troublesome territories into the realm. Preparations for the Greek expedition were methodical and comprehensive, befitting the heir to the great administrator. For 4 years, resources flowed in from across the vast territories. Provisions were stockpiled, ships built, troops gathered from many nations. The scale of these preparations dwarfed anything the Mediterranean world had previously witnessed. Herodotus claims the assembled forces numbered over 2 million men, a clear exaggeration, but modern historians estimate an army of perhaps 200,000 troops, supported by a fleet of around 1,200 vessels. This massive host represented the multi-ethnic character of the empire itself. The imperial army was a remarkable mosaic of peoples and skills. The immortals marched from the heartland clad in their scale armor. Bactrian cavalry thundered in from the eastern frontiers. Ethiopian archers arrived from the south, while Phoenician sailors commanded the vast fleets. Dozens of other contingents followed, each bringing distinctive weapons, tactics, and appearances to transport this enormous expedition across the Hellespont. To cross from Asia into Europe, engineers from the region of Dardanelles built 2 enormous pontoon bridges. Hundreds of ships lashed together with flax and papyrus cables. When a fierce storm destroyed the first attempt, Herodotus tells us that the enraged monarch ordered the sea itself whipped as punishment. Likely a tale colored by Greek imagination to highlight Eastern arrogance, it nonetheless captures the unprecedented scale of imperial ambition. The rebuilt bridges allowed the vast army to cross over 7 days and nights. In the spring of 480 BCE, to avoid the dangerous waters around Mount Athos, where an earlier fleet had been lost, workers had spent 3 years digging a canal across the base of the peninsula. This engineering feat astounded contemporary observers. As the massive force advanced southward through Thrace and Macedon, most local powers submitted without resistance. The aliens, northernmost of the Greek peoples, accepted earth and water, the symbolic tokens of submission. Only a coalition led by Athens and Sparta prepared serious resistance, though they could muster only a fraction of the invading numbers. The first major clash came at the narrow coastal pass of Thermopylae. Here, a Greek force under the Spartan king Leonidas attempted to block the southern advance for 3 days. The disciplined Greek hoplites fought in tight phalanx formation, inflicting heavy casualties on the lightly armed imperial troops. Only when a local guide revealed a mountain path allowing elite imperial forces to flank the Greeks did the battle turn. Realizing his position was compromised, Leonidas dismissed most contingents, but remained with his 300 Spartans, alongside some Thespians and Thebans, to cover the retreat. This final stand, though ending in total defeat, became one of history's most celebrated last defenses. A symbol of courage against overwhelming odds. With the land route open, the royal army marched into central Greece. capturing and burning Athens, whose population had evacuated to nearby islands. This might have marked complete victory, if not for an unexpected naval defeat that changed the campaign's course. The Greek allied fleet, though outnumbered, had withdrawn to the narrow straits between Athens and the island of Salamis. Here, on a late September day in 480 BCE, they lured the larger imperial fleet into confined waters, where their superior numbers became a disadvantage. Unable to maneuver properly and with communication chaotic, the imperial armada suffered devastating losses. The monarch himself watched from a golden throne on the shores of Attica, as the naval forces, years in the making, were shattered. This unexpected reversal forced a strategic reassessment. With supply lines vulnerable to Greek naval activity, the royal commander withdrew the bulk of his forces to Asia, leaving his general Mardonius with a formidable army to continue operations. The next campaigning season, in 479 BCE, brought a decisive confrontation at Plataea. There, a united Greek army under Spartan leadership defeated Mardonius's forces after fierce fighting. Almost simultaneously, the reconstituted Greek fleet won another victory at Mycale, on the Anatolian coast, destroying beached imperial ships and defeating supporting land forces. These defeats marked the end of direct attempts to conquer mainland Greece, although the empire retained control over Anatolia, Thrace, and Macedonia. The empire would never again mount a major expedition against the Greek heartland. The failure of this massive campaign, despite overwhelming numbers, demonstrated the limits even the greatest military power faces against determined defenders advantaged by geography. Greek victories at Salamis, Plataea, and Mycale were later mythologized as freedom triumphing over despotism, Western individualism overcoming Eastern collectivism. But this simplified story obscures complex realities. Many Greek states had sided with the invaders, and Athens and Sparta themselves soon pursued imperial ambitions. Still, these battles preserved the Greek political system's independence, allowing its unique culture and intellect to flourish on its own path. For the empire, these setbacks were not existential threats. The vast realm continued to function effectively. Central provinces remained untouched by distant conflict. The monarch, though disappointed by his European failure, returned to the imperial core to focus on other projects, particularly completing the magnificent construction program at Persepolis, begun by his father. The colossal buildings at Persepolis, including the massive hall of 100 columns, testified to continuing imperial prosperity despite Greek setbacks. Work also continued on canals, road maintenance, and other infrastructure sustaining an economy spanning 3 continents. Yet beneath this impressive facade, subtle signs of imperial challenges were emerging. The costly Greek campaign had drained the treasury, prompting increased taxation. Court life grew insular. The monarch appeared less often in public, while power concentrated in the hands of palace officials, especially harem women and eunuchs, controlling access to the increasingly remote sovereign. In 465 BCE, 2 decades after assuming the throne, Xerxes fell victim to palace conspiracy. The commander of the royal bodyguard Artabanus conspired with the eunuch chamberlain to assassinate the king in his bedchamber. The conspirators then framed Xerxes' eldest son for the murder, executing him before placing a younger son, Artaxerxes, on the throne, presumably expecting to control the young ruler as a puppet. But if that was Artabanus's plan, it failed. After months consolidating his position, Artaxerxes turned on the conspirators and had them executed, establishing his own independent authority. Thus began a new chapter in imperial history, one that would see growing challenges, both external and internal. As the sun set on the reign of Xerxes, a king whose rule ended in shadows of palace intrigue and whispered conspiracies, the legacy he left behind continued to glow softly, like the fading embers of a great fire. Towering stone palaces rose at Persepolis, monuments not just of power, but of a world united in its splendid diversity. The empire, vast and varied, breathed steadily under the careful systems his father had laid down, even as distant storms marked the limits of ambition. Though his great campaign against the Greeks had faltered, it brought a quiet change. Instead of swords clashing on distant shores, The empire learned to weave its influence with threads of diplomacy and gold, gently pulling on the tangled web of rivalries and alliances that stretched across the Aegean Sea. Sparta's rise against Athens was no mere happenstance. Subtle hands from afar had nudged the course of history without a single arrow loosed. The stories told of Xerxes often paint him as a figure of harshness and pride, but beneath these tales lies a tapestry woven with the complexity of ruling a realm that stretched from desert sands to snow-capped mountains. This was no simple kingdom, but a living mosaic of peoples and traditions, held together by a delicate balance of respect and order. When Xerxes' son, Artaxerxes, stepped quietly into his father's place, the empire entered a new chapter, one where the pulse of everyday life echoed far beyond the throne rooms and battles. Imagine the gentle rhythm of life along the Nile, where farmers waited patiently for the floods to nourish their fields, or the high steppes where horsemen traced ancient paths beneath endless skies. Village elders gathered to settle disputes with the wisdom of generations, their voices calm against the backdrop of an empire that valued tradition as much as tribute. Across the land, cities hummed with vibrant energy. Babylon's towering walls, Memphis' timeless temples, and Sardis' bustling markets, all weaving together stories of faith, trade, and governance. Here, imperial officials moved quietly, scribes translating messages in Aramaic, a language like a soft current carrying the voice of the king through distant provinces. The great roads that stretched like arteries across the realm were not just pathways for soldiers, but lifelines for merchants, travelers, and ideas. Trade flourished as rare silks shimmered alongside delicate glass, and exotic ivory met golden vessels crafted far to the east. From the mountains of Bactria to the shores of the Mediterranean, goods and stories alike crossed borders, blending cultures like colors in a vast, living tapestry. Even the soldiers who once marched in the king's armies found new homes among the people, settling in garrisons where languages mixed and families grew in rich diversity. Their lives and those of the locals intertwined over time, creating new identities that bore the marks of many lands. At the heart of this grand empire stood the great cities, Susa, Babylon, Pasargadae, and Persepolis, each a jewel shining with the power and ceremony of the Persian kings. Here, amidst grand halls and endless columns, the rulers and their advisors shaped the fate of a world that stretched across continents and cultures, holding together a dream of unity and diversity. And as night falls softly over these ancient lands, the echoes of their stories continue to whisper on the wind, inviting us to rest beneath the vast sky of history. The reign of Xerxes ended as many great reigns do, not in battle, but in whispers. A conspiracy in the shadows, a blade in the night. Yet kings may fall, but empires endure. And Xerxes, though his name would be etched by Greek historians as a tyrant, left behind a realm that hummed with order, grandeur, and quiet efficiency. His greatest testament was not in battles fought, but in stones laid. Persepolis, that jewel of the empire, rose higher under his watch. Its stairways carved with the figures of 100 nations, Medes and Babylonians, Egyptians and Lydians, all frozen in stone, bearing tribute to their king. This was no mere palace. It was a declaration, a testament to an empire that did not merely conquer, but absorbed. Yet for all its splendor, the true strength of Persia lay not in its monuments, but in its systems. The satrapies, the roads, the scribes who recorded everything in neat Aramaic script. These were the veins that kept the empire alive. Xerxes had inherited this machine from his father, Darius, and he left it turning smoothly, even as his own story ended in betrayal. The Greeks, of course, told a different tale. To them, Xerxes was the invader who failed, the proud king humbled at Salamis, but empires do not rise and fall on single battles. The truth was simpler. Persia had learned. After the costly wars in Greece, the great king's strategists turned to subtler tools. Why send armies when gold could do the work? Why fight Athenians when Spartans could be persuaded to fight them instead? The Peloponnesian War became Persia's masterpiece of diplomacy, a war fought with Athenian blood and Persian silver. Sparta marched, Athens fell, and the Aegean remained in Persia's orbit, all without another Persian spear needing to cross the sea. The Greeks wrote of Xerxes as a despot, but history is written by the victors. And the victors here were not the men who won battles, but the empire that won the peace. When Artaxerxes I took the throne, the empire did not shudder. It simply turned its gaze forward, adjusting, adapting, as it always had. The true wonder of Persia was not its kings, but its people. The countless lives that moved beneath the shadow of its power. From the Nile's floodplains to the steppes of Bactria, the empire was a tapestry of 100 peoples. Egyptian farmers still planted their crops by the river's rhythm. Mesopotamian laborers still dredged ancient canals. Highland shepherds in Anatolia still led their flocks between summer and winter pastures. Just as their ancestors had done centuries before the first Persian king rose to power. Persia did not crush these rhythms. It simply asked for taxes in return for peace. In the cities, Persia's presence was more visible. Babylon's markets bustled with glass from Phoenicia, ivory from Africa, tin from lands beyond the western mountains. Imperial officials moved among the crowds, collecting taxes, keeping records, ensuring the great machine ran smoothly. And then there were the garrisons. Towns of soldiers, veterans granted land for their service. Here, Persians married locals, Greeks traded with Medes, and cultures blended like spices in a merchant's stall. A soldier might be buried with a Babylonian amulet, a Greek cup, and a Persian dagger. His grave a silent testament to an empire that was not just vast, but woven together. And at the center of it all, the royal capitals, Susa, Babylon, Persepolis, where the great king held court, where satraps came to kneel, where the fate of millions was decided over wine and whispered counsel. This was the Persian Empire. Not just the wars, not just the kings, but the quiet, unbroken pulse of 1,000 lives, moving in harmony beneath the banner of the Shahanshah. And as the stars turned overhead, the empire endured. In the heart of the empire, an idea took form in stone and spirit. Persepolis rose not merely as a city, but as a grand statement, a place built to embody the vision of the Achaemenid kings. Its soaring staircases and vast halls, supported by countless towering columns, told the silent story of a world united beneath one rule. Delicate carvings graced the walls, showing travelers and tribute bearers arriving from every distant corner. A quiet reminder that many peoples, many cultures, all found their place under a single sky. At the very top of this world stood the great king, almost like a figure touched by the divine. Around him, a circle of powerful families from the empire's heartland formed the core of his court. Descendants of the legendary 7 families who had helped shape the kingdom's rise. These nobles held the highest roles, their authority stretching through generations. Beyond them, an expanding aristocracy took root, drawn mainly from the empire's central provinces, but also welcoming respected leaders from distant lands. By weaving local elites into the fabric of power, the empire grew stronger, its many threads bound into a stable whole. Beneath these great families lived the learned and skilled scribes who recorded the flow of daily life, engineers who dreamed of grand canals and roads, physicians who healed, and architects who shaped cities. Their talents crossed ethnic lines, prized and rewarded by the imperial administration. From Babylonian stargazers to Egyptian doctors, from Greek builders to Aramaic scribes, all found a place where expertise mattered more than origin. At the foundation of this vast society were the everyday people, farmers tending the earth, artisans crafting their goods, laborers sustaining the bustling cities. Their lives varied widely depending on where they lived. In Egypt and Babylonia, age-old social systems still held sway, with intricate layers between free citizens and those bound in servitude. In the imperial heartland, a clear structure separated aristocrats, free commoners, and a dependent working class. Slavery existed, but it was different from the harshness that would mark later centuries, often the result of debts, punishment, or captivity, with those enslaved working in homes, mines, or fields. The laws and customs governing these roles changed as you moved from region to region, reflecting the empire's respect for local traditions. Women, too, lived varied lives across the realm. In the heartland, noble women held considerable rights, owning land, managing businesses, and sometimes even stepping into administrative roles. Tablets from Persepolis reveal that women workers were given the same food rations as men for equal labor. an early glimpse of fairness in a world so long ruled by men. Queens and princesses wielded quiet power at court, overseeing vast households and influencing the fate of kings. Observers from Greece, where women's freedoms were more limited, often marveled at the Eastern world's openness. Religion within the empire was a tapestry of faiths. At its core was Ahura Mazda, the supreme god of Zoroastrian belief, guiding the king's authority. Yet the empire was a sanctuary for many traditions. Temples dedicated to Marduk in Babylon, Amen in Egypt, or Athena in Greek cities flourished with imperial support. The story of the Jewish people returning to rebuild their temple in Jerusalem under royal blessing speaks softly of this respect. Across the empire, priests, scholars, and oracles continued their ancient roles, sustained by the treasury itself. This tolerance was both practical and profound. By honoring diverse gods, the empire nurtured peace and believed that many names might reflect a single universal truth. The great king could be the chosen of Ahura Mazda for some, the earthly representative of Marduk for others, and the rightful pharaoh for yet another. Learning and knowledge blossomed throughout the empire's many lands. Ancient centers like Babylon and Egypt carried forward their timeless traditions, training scribes, charting stars, studying medicine, and advancing mathematics. In the imperial heartland, young nobles were taught skills for leadership, how to ride, to wield a bow, and to speak honestly. Literacy spread among administrators, who mastered several scripts to communicate across cultures. Ideas traveled as freely as goods. Babylonian astronomy inspiring Greek thinkers, Egyptian healing crossing deserts and mountains, architectural techniques mingling across cities. The empire's vast road network was its nervous system. The royal road from Sardis to Susa stretched like a ribbon through the land, dotted with stations where couriers rested and messages sped onward. Regional roads connected capitals to villages, while ships sailed the seas, carrying goods and stories alike between Phoenician, Greek, and Egyptian ports. Officials, merchants, and artisans journeyed with a freedom that brought distant corners of the world close together. Within this lively exchange, material culture reflected a beautiful balance. Standardized coins made trade smooth. Luxury textiles and intricate jewelry bore styles admired far and wide. Yet local crafts kept their own distinct flair, blending foreign influences with homegrown artistry. In all these ways, the empire held together not through force alone, but through a delicate dance of unity and diversity. A grand design that embraced many voices, many customs, all resting beneath the wide, shared sky.